So welcome to the tissue unit, and we also will be talking about skin in this unit, but we're going to start with talking about tissues. Tissues are groups of cells that are similar in structure and perform a common or related function. So basically, these are a bunch of cells working together to perform a task. There are 4 different types of tissues: epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous. Muscle and nervous tissue we will touch on very, very briefly, but we will hit those more in depth when we actually get to those units. So we're going to have a whole nervous system unit where we will talk again about nervous tissue. And same thing with muscle. We will have a whole muscle system unit, so we will touch on those when we get there. We're going to start with epithelial tissues. And epithelial tissues are used for coverings, so they will cover the outsides of organs. They will act as linings, so we will see them on the insides of organs, and they will also be present in glandular tissue, or they make up glands. There are several different functions for epithelial tissue. Protection, so when we're talking about those coverings, remember epithelial tissue is used for coverings, so because of that, it is acting as a shield and protecting the underlying tissues. A great example of this is your epidermis. Your epidermis is the topmost layer of your skin. It's what you look at when you see someone, you see their epidermis. Then we have absorption. This is where the tissue is responsible for obtaining materials from the substrate or the fluid around it. The most common example of that is the digestive tract. Then we have secretion. This is where we're talking about those glandular tissues that we talked about before, where we're going to release products into either the bloodstream or into the digestive tract. An example of this would be the small intestine. We have specialized cells that are going to secrete mucus to protect those organs. Excretion, so this is where we're going to be removing waste products. So this is kind of a cleansing function. This is really predominantly found in the epithelial tissues of the kidney, but also in the liver and some other places. And it's really to get rid of waste is what we're doing here. Surface transport, so really think about like moving things along the surface of cells. This is particularly important for mucus. Mucus lines our organs, and so it can become trapped and prevent all of the functionality that we need for those cells. So moving that mucus along is really important. In fact, a breakdown in how that epithelial tissue is moving mucus is one of the major symptoms of cystic fibrosis. Sensory functions, so this is where you're going to see nerve endings and specialized nerve cells that are going to be doing the actual functionality of sensing the world around us. So taste buds in the mouth are an example of epithelial tissue engaging in sensory function. And then some special features. Polarity, you might be familiar with polarity as it relates to chemistry. And in chemistry, we talk about molecules or atoms having poles where they have positive and negative charges. Like if you think about water is a polar molecule. The idea of polar meaning ends or opposite sides is what we're really getting at here with polarity. epithelial tissue has an apical surface, which is where it's carrying out its function, and then it has a basal surface. And that basal surface is really just connecting it to the surrounding tissue. So that's what we see with polarity, is that it has a functioning side and then it has a connective side. Speaking of connective, it is supported by connective tissue, and we'll talk about the different types of connective tissue, and you'll see how that functions a little bit later. Specialized contacts. So this is where it is specialized to do different jobs and come in contact with different material, specifically material that's outside of the body. So epithelial tissue, because it's coverings and linings, is really going to come in contact with outside material that's foreign to the body, and so it has specialized contact to do that. Avascular, that means it doesn't have blood vessels running through it, but it is innervated, and innervated means it has nerves running through it. So we have nerves running through our epithelial tissue, but we do not have blood vessels, and blood vessels are going to be under that basal surface in the connective tissue, and that's how we are able to get the blood supply that these tissues need without the blood vessels being directly inside of that tissue. And also, epithelial tissues have a fantastic regeneration rate. They really go through mitosis very, very quickly, so their repair rate is very, very fast. So regeneration is key to epithelial function. Cancers of epithelial tissue are called carcinomas. And remember, epithelial tissues are found all throughout the body. We touched on some different places that they would be found. So you can have lots of different types of carcinoma. One last thing about cancers in epithelial tissue, they are particularly susceptible to cancer because of that regeneration rate. So I mentioned that they go through mitosis very, very quickly. And if you remember from basic biology, that cancer is a disordered mitosis, where mitosis is happening unregulated. And because epithelial tissues are very prone to mitosis, they develop cancers. They are very susceptible to cancers. We organize epithelial tissue, or we categorize them based on their shape and how they are arranged. So these cells can be either in layers, or they can be in a single layer, and that's how we're going to categorize them. So we have cell shapes. First, we have squamous. Squamous cells are square shaped, but they're very, very thin. So they look basically flat. Cuboidal look like little cubes, and columnar look like tiny columns. Very straightforward naming scheme for epithelial tissue here. We either have simple, which is a single layer of epithelial cells, or we have stratified, where the cells are arranged into 2 or more layers. And then we also have things like transitional, where we have stratified, but the cells change shape as they move through those layers. So we'll talk about the reason for that in a second. And then we have pseudostratified, where they appear to be layered, but it is in fact just a single layer. And I'll talk about that when we look at some pictures. Okay, so simple squamous. This is found in the alveoli of the lungs, and those are the air sacs of the lungs, and they are very useful for allowing for diffusion to occur because the cells are very thin. And if you look, you can see that connective tissue. So you can see that apical surface here where the diffusion would start to take place. And then you can see that basal layer where it's connecting to that connective tissue underneath. And then, so you can see that square shape that very flat appearance. You can see the alveoli of the lungs. Then you have simple cuboidal. This is, again, those cube shapes of cells. These are found in the linings of the kidneys. They're also found on the surface of the ovaries, and they are going to perform secretion and absorption. So this provides enough volume to really allow for secretion to take place. And so here's some kidney tubules. You can see what that looks like, and you can see those square cube shaped cells there. Just another example. Simple columnar. This is found in the digestive tract and in the lining of the uterus. And these are the just for protection. They allow for secretion, and these are what are going to allow us to secrete mucus, because again, we have enough volume here to have some specialized cells, specifically goblet cells, that are going to secrete mucus. And then you can see that there. And I want you to kind of take note of the way that the nuclei look. You can see the nuclei all appear to be in one line. And then here you can see that goblet cell, and it is secreting mucus that is going to flow along the surface. And here you can see some ciliation. So these are ciliated columnar cells, and that's going to help spread that mucus along, is what those cilia are for. So here we have pseudostratified columnar epithelium. The reason that we call it pseudostratified is that it looks like it's in multiple layers. And the reason for that is because we're looking at the nuclei. So nuclei are what indicate stratification. And when we see nuclei stacked on top of each other, that's a really good indication that we're looking at stratified epithelial tissue. However, in pseudostratified, you can see that there's not really a clear delineation between those nuclei being in one layer or another. They're kind of staggered. And that's how we're going to tell this apart from a stratified epithelium. So this is the lining of the respiratory tract. This is often ciliated because, again, we're trying to move that mucus along. It also is found in various tubes of the reproductive tract. And again, protection and secretion. So we're going to be secreting mucus here. And of course, we're going to be moving sex cells along. So here you can more clearly see that, it looks like it's almost in layers. It looks like we've almost got 3. But if you start tracking things like the cell membrane, you can start to see it's really more complicated than that. It looks like it's a lot of overlapping, and it looks, we don't have that clear delineation between layers. So that's how we know this is pseudostratified. This is even more jumbled, but it gives you a good indication of the kinds of things we see when we look at tissue samples. And then just an example of showing you where those goblet cells might be. Stratified squamous epithelium. This is found in the mouth. This is also found in the esophagus. And this is really important for protection because those cells are going to come in contact with a lot of different things and can become damaged very, very easily. We also see stratified squamous epithelium in the epidermis, but the unique thing about the epidermis is that it goes through a process called keratinization, and keratinization is where the cells become packed with keratin, and it waterproofs the skin. That's the purpose of keratin, is it's a protein to waterproof skin, and it is really beneficial for protection. So here you can see all of those cells, those square-shaped cells stacked on top of each other. You can see all of those many different layers. And you can see all of those nuclei all the way down. Because again, remember, these are very, very thin cells. Again, just kind of a neater presentation, but you can again see all of those cells stacked up on top of each other. And I like this one because this shows you keratinization. So you can actually see the cells down here are all squamous cells. And what happens as they move up this way is they become keratinized. And they actually lose their nucleus for the most part. You still see some shadows of nuclei that didn't get fully keratinized, but you can see those layers of cells all tightly packed on top of each other, and they're no longer living. These are all dead cells. They were fully keratinized, so they were packed full of keratin as they were pushed through these layers. Then we have stratified cuboidal epithelium. This is where we have sweat. This is what we find in sweat glands, salivary glands, also the mammary glands. And these are there to kind of protect tissue. They provide some cushioning. They also allow for a little bit of secretion of mucus. So here you can see that stacking. You can see those cells are much thicker than what we saw with the squamous cells, but not nearly as tall as the columnar epithelium that we looked at before. And here again, you can see what that looks like. Now we have stratified columnar. Stratified columnar, you can see we're going to have that deep cell volume there, but we're also going to have it in multiple layers. This is really found along the male urethra and some ducts of some glands, and it is there to provide enough volume to make a lot of secretion, and it also is very protective because of that amount of volume there. So here you can see that clear layering, very different from what we saw with the pseudostratified, where you could see that zigzag pattern, but here we have that very clear delineation. Same thing here, you can see that clear delineation. And then we have transitional. So transitional's major function is that it has the ability to distend. It has the ability to expand, which is really useful when you consider where it is. This is found in the lining of the urinary bladder, so what you would probably just call your bladder, and in the passages of the urinary tract. And so if you think about the bladder needing to expand in order to accommodate increases in volume, specifically around as urine is collected into the bladder, that distensibility becomes really, really beneficial. And so you can see that transitional tissue over here where it has several different cell shapes to provide for that stretching that's going to occur there. So you can see all of those different, you have cuboidal up here, you have some squamous here through the middle, maybe some possible columnar here on the bottom. And so that is the end of our epithelial tissue. This is going to be the end of this set of notes. And we'll pick up with connective tissue next.